Okay, welcome to another of my iPad painting tutorials. On today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint a candle flame. Something I've done before a few years ago, but I feel like I want to do a better version today. It's quite festive, we're approaching Christmas and it feels like an appropriate subject matter as well. So as usual, I'm using the app Procreate. I've opened an A4 canvas. I have some pre-selected colours here. The codes for these are down in the description of this video. All you need to do if you use the app Procreate, which is this app, is go down to the value section. Within the value section here, you can type in the codes that are appropriate to those colours. The colour will appear up here and you just drag it down to your colour palette and then you can recreate the exact colours that I'm going to be using for this tutorial. Alternative to that, there is a link in the description there too, which takes you to my Patreon page, and the actual colour file is downloadable there for free. The next thing you need to know is the brushes I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using the soft brush within airbrushing. I also later on will be using the medium hard brush, and then when I come to do some other tricks on the eraser tool, I might try some different things and I'll show you those a little later on. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my background. I'm going to change the colour to my darkest colour here. Then on our first layer here, we're going to go to our brushes. We're going to select the soft brush. We're going to go back to our colours and we're going to start adding some effects of a candle now. So I'm not going to use this first colour here. I'm going to move along to the second colour along, and I'm going to put the brush at around the lower end of 4% and I'll put the opacity at around 50%. So with this brush now, I'm just going to map in where I want my candle flame to exist. So the first thing you can do is you can just fill in this a little bit. It's going to be getting lighter as it gets closer to the flame that we're going to be adding anyway. Perhaps if you turn the opacity down to around 20%, we can just soften that in a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Gaussian blur. I'm going to use the pencil on this rather than the whole layer. I'm just going to check that the size of my brush is appropriate. So you can see somewhere around the 3 or 4%. And I'm just going to use it here to soften in, maybe turn the opacity up to around 50%. And I can just blur it in where it's appropriate to. I want to avoid the edges though. Let's put the opacity on full. Let's really blur this in. So I'm going to blur it downwards. So it's quite a good way of preserving perhaps a neater edge here, but at the same time blurring it down. Okay, we're going to move along to our next colour along, which is this lighter colour. We're going to turn the size of the brush to around 3%, turn the opacity back down again to around 50%, and we're just going to use this a little bit more carefully now. Bring in this front edge of our candle and maybe the back edge of that shape too. Maybe the whole section at the top here is going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to be directly facing the candle flame, which is going to be in this area obviously. And if we just turn the opacity really low again, so we'll put it even lower because it's a really strong bright colour, so we'll put it at around 10%, and then we can just soften that in a little bit around this point. Do it a few times. You can see I'm allowing it to develop almost layers here, steps, and that doesn't matter because we can go back into it with our Gaussian blur again. So we'll do that. We'll go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, use the pencil tool. We'll keep it on the same settings as before, so it was around 3%, but we will put it on full opacity again, and we'll just blur that in. Try to preserve the outside shape of the candle. Now, I don't like the way that these edges are appearing here, so you're almost getting like legs appearing on it there. Not a problem. We can always just blur it up there, and then down in the center, and you'll find that it starts to even up. Okay, we'll go back to our soft brush again. Make sure it's a little bit lower, so at the top end of 2%. We'll turn the opacity back down again to around 20%. And we'll just use this to define in this top edge of our candle for now. Now, I'm not going to get too bogged down in the tiniest of details on this just yet. I'm just setting the stage, so now we'll move quickly on to the actual flame itself. But what we will need is to decide where our center point is. So we'll put a little marker there. We'll extend that up a little bit. Then we'll go back to our colors, move to the darker brown one there. I'll just show you that again. So we've gone from this color, we're moving to this one. We'll use this color to bring our candle wick up a little bit. And we'll go to this darker colour and we'll add that as well. Okay, we're going to create another layer. We're going to go back to our colours and we're going to use the second row of colours. We will come back to those top layers at a future point, but we're going to move along to this first blue colour. We're going to go to our soft airbrush. We're going to turn it quite low, so we're going to put it at maybe the lower end of 2%, and we're going to put it very low on the opacity. So we're going to put it at around 10% opacity. And we're just at this point in our tutorial or our painting, going to start putting in some of this blue at the bottom section here. So it's going to just creep in, and we're going to use it to define the outer edge of our candle flame. Now, we can take it all the way up and have it describe the overall shape, but we're not going to see the blue later on at the top of our flame. Really, we're going to notice it here, but we won't see it up here at the end. But it's okay, we're just using it to define the overall shape initially. And like I say, the most important bit is this section here. So once you've got the lines in place, you can go over them a little bit, just make them really noticeable at this bottom section. Then you can turn the size of the brush up to around 3%, keep it on the low opacity, and from that edge now you can just start to blend it in a little bit. So you can have it creeping in from that outer edge a little bit more, but you don't want to do too much. That's probably sufficient. We're going to create another layer. I prefer to keep everything on different layers just in case we want to knock something back later on. We'll go to our next colour along, which is this much stronger, or much warmer obviously, an orange colour. So we're going to use this on the same settings we did just then, which is the top end of 2%, and we're going to keep it in the 10% opacity. And we're just going to start feeding this into this candle flame, not at the bottom of the blue section, but just a little bit higher up. This colour we can allow to really be more noticeable a little bit later on as well, higher up in the flame. So what we want is almost like the blue is going to be noticeable just on that outer edge here. The orange is creeping in at around this point, and it's going to cross the centre to the other side. I'm going over it a few times because it's on very low opacity, and you can do that all the way across. Now I'm leaving this darker section in the centre, and it is important it is left darker. If you find that you're starting to concentrate it too much in there, just go backtrack it a little bit. You want to have everything fading a little bit more in that centre area. Zoom back out so you can see the whole thing. And if you're not happy with the way it's going, we'll do the same that we did before. So we'll go back to our adjustments, our Gaussian blur. We'll use the pencil tool, and we'll keep it at the same here and the same there. Maybe the opacity can be up for the adjustments though, so we can blend that in. You need to be careful you don't do it too strong, so we will reduce that back down to around 50%-ish, and we'll just blend that in where we need to. Now the good thing about using the pencil rather than the layer is the layer would just blur it in every direction, so you'd lose that outer edge. Whereas if you just do the pencil, you can concentrate your blurring exactly where it needs to be, and you can preserve the overall shape much better. So go back to our just ordinary brush, and you will need to knock your opacity back down again because the Gaussian blur actually changed that brush setting for us. So we're still on the top end of 2%, and we're still on the 10%, or roughly 10% here. So we'll just start to bring this all the way up. It's going to be quite strong and bright all the way at the top anyway. I'm not worried about neatness there because we're going to go over it with some brighter colours. Okay, so speaking of brighter colours, we'll go along, we'll create another layer, go along to our colours. We're going to pick this really bright colour now. We're going to use this carefully. So we're not going to change the brush settings. It's still going to be at the top end of 2%, and it's still going to be on 10% there. But now we're just going to start bringing it in at the edges and then letting it go across the middle section. Allow it to build up gradually. Take it to the top pretty much. Could always actually increase the brush size to around 3% for this. Take it up to the top. Bring it down a little bit. We don't want to destroy the orange that was already there, so we just need to be a little bit careful not to destroy. We want to preserve some of it, but we have the option again of going back with our Gaussian blur and then just fine-tuning this anyway. So we'll creep it down a little bit into this area. We will do the Gaussian blur in a moment. We'll just really concentrate our brightness now in the center. Let's go back to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, use the pencil. So we will need to turn the opacity up to around 50% again for it to be noticeable. We'll keep the brush size at around 3%, that's fine for this purpose. And we'll just soften it in this area. And then at the top as well. We're going to create another layer. We're going to go back to our colours, and we have a couple of different colours that are really going to help with the effects. We're going to use this yellow colour first. We'll turn the size of the brush down to probably the lower end of 2%, and we'll turn the opacity down to around 15% for this. And just where the blue starts to fade out, at the end of that, so about halfway of our flame, also where the darkness starts to disappear as well and it becomes bright, we'll bring some of this warmer colour onto the edge. If we zoom in a little bit, just so you can really see this, just some slight more golden of a yellow colour just along the edge, and then we'll go back to our colours and we'll keep on the same layer for this. We'll turn the size of the brush up to around 3%, put the opacity really low at around, we'll stay on the 10%, see how that works. And then we can just start to, on the outer part of this flame, start to add some orange warmth, a real glow around that area. I'm going to concentrate some of this up at the top as well. Now, it's a slightly different effect that I'm going for with this colour. So we've got that section at the top, but when we go to our Gaussian blur, we're going to affect the whole layer. And we're going to blur it out to probably, in my example, around the 12-13%. Any more than that, it just completely disappears. So we'll put it somewhere about the 13% in. We'll go back to our yellow colour. And with this yellow, we'll start adding a little bit more of that in there as well. Just in this centre area. Again, I'm going to blur it again. Gaussian blur, affect the whole layer, and blur it out a bit more to a similar point around the 13%. Now I'm just going to go back a layer onto this layer where all the bright colour was, but I'm going to really amplify that up now. So I'm going to go back to that bright colour. I'm going to turn the size of the brush to the top end of 2%, but I'm going to put the opacity up to 20% now. So this is really going to have more of an impact for this colour. But we're going to make a sharper point at the top of our flame. I'm just going to redefine that edge for us. And I'm just going to really intensify up in this center area as well. Just be careful you don't come down into this section, so let's keep it really blended in smoothly. We could always turn the opacity up to 100%, just see what impact that has. If you've gone over it enough times in that center area now, it shouldn't make a difference. That's a good way of testing whether you've built it up enough. But yeah, generally it would be best to do it a little bit more gradually so it does stay more soft focus or blended in more gradually. I'm going to go back to this layer above. I think it actually is important that it doesn't compete with that layer, so I'm going to put it underneath that layer, and that way I feel now with this layer, even though it was a later layer, now it's underneath, I can go back to these warmer colours and I can start using them, but it's not going to interfere with the overall intensity of that flame. So I'm going to keep it at the top end of 2%, we'll keep it at the 20% opacity, and I feel like now I can just a bit more confidently start to place it at the top and have it creating another warm spike at the top there. If you feel like you want to use the smudge tool, you can go to the smudge tool, maybe put it on the medium brush and just smudge in there so it extends it up a little bit. That could be a nice effect. Go back to our brush, bring it back down along the sides. Go back to our yellow colour, which was the one before this. Add a bit more in this center area because the most intense part of the light is going to be this middle section, so it makes sense that you'd have some slightly more of a glowing section surrounding it as well. And again, we can go to our Gaussian blur, affect the whole layer, just move it in a little bit this time, so around the 7 or 8%. Another thing we can do, if we go back to this warm color, is we could create another layer. I'm doing this so just in case I overdo this, we'll turn the size of the brush up really quite big to around 20%, and we'll turn it really low at around the 5% opacity. Now I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can really see this, and it's a large brush so I can just start to add it generally to the area, and you can see it's just starting to create that overall glowing appearance. Now it's easy to overdo it, so I'll backtrack that back to the beginning of it again. That will go to that layer and we'll clear it. I'll turn the size of the brush even further up to around 30%, and maybe I'll just concentrate it in that center area a little bit. So now when I turn the layer on and off, you can see the impact it's having. If you want to exaggerate it a little bit further, you can do. You can just spread it out a bit more. Again, double check the effect it's having, see whether it's beneficial, whether you like it. If you like it and you want to test it a bit more, test it a bit more. Is that having the effect that you desire? I think that probably does impact and help it somewhat. I do feel it perhaps it could compete too much with what else we've got there. So what you can do is you can just move it down your layers until it finds its right spot, and maybe it should be underneath all of those flame colours, and then we can just see the overall effect that it is having. And let's put it behind the candle too, why not? But you can see the effect it is still having. We'll go back to our blue layer. Let's just refine a little bit. So we will zoom in a little bit. I don't often do this, but it is more of a detailed tutorial. So we're going to reduce the size of the brush to around the lower end of 2% and just turn it up a little bit to around 15% opacity. And just with the blue, we'll start to creep this up a little bit more, just refine it. So you're getting a nice sharp detail. Maybe change the shape of it slightly. We will go to the Gaussian blur. We use the pencil tool, just turn the size of it. In fact, it's still in the same setting, so we can just go straight from the brush to the blurring tool and just soften it in where it feels appropriate. So I'm just going to take some of the intensity away from the middle section, just so I can really sharpen up that edge, if you can see what I'm doing there. So I just want to extra emphasize that edge. I think that works better. If I could also go in with the eraser tool and just maybe remove some of this little bottom section here, just so it really emphasizes it on this edge as well. Now I feel like I want to do a little bit more on the layer above. So we go back to our colors. It was this color and this color. I'm going to put the brush on this color to around the lower end of 3%, and we'll keep the opacity lower to around 5%. And I'm just going to start bringing some of this orange color down a little bit. Now I feel like the wick isn't defined enough, so we need to see that a little bit more clearly. By bringing this orange color down a little bit more, we can really start to leave that scent a bit darker, and it reveals the wick that is there. And we'll do the same, go to the next color along, which is this color. We want this really low opacity. We'll put it around the 3%. So easy to overdo this color. In fact, we will turn the size of the brush down as well to the lower end of 2%, and we'll just sharpen this around the edge where it meets the blue. So it goes from blue and then it goes this brighter color. Now getting into more detail at this point. The overall effect was achieved anyway, but we're just refining a little bit more. So you could stop at that earlier stage and your overall effect was definitely still there, but we're just pushing it a little bit further, see if we can ramp up the realism a little bit. So we can continue with this lighter colour now to really define where the wick is going to be as well. So I'm just going to bring some more of this light into this section. You're also going to lose some of that candle wick. You can always go with the blur and just blur some of it away anyway, but we'll stick with the actual brush. Add some extra light. So again, we're still on the 2% and we're on the 3% opacity. And we'll just add some more of this bright colour. Bring some of this brighter colour down so it really blends in more almost with the blue. It actually exists on the inside of the blue, so the blue sort of hugs the outside of this brighter area. And then maybe just lose the top of our wick as well. Soften it in with the bright light. We could also go back to our Gaussian blur, go to the pencil, soften that in a little bit as we require. So we'll put the Gaussian blur brush at around 3% and whack it up to around 50% again. Just soften it in a little bit. If we're starting to get too much texture in our brush, then actually for this type of subject matter, we don't really want any texture. So we'll eliminate that. One thing we could do with our different layers, if we go to our layer 4, we could try this out. It might be a little bit too much. We could go to the bloom setting. We could try the whole layer and intensify it up, and it really does help actually. So you don't have to do too much. You could just put it up to around 7-8%. If you do it any more, you know, it looks realistic basically if you just add that little bit. It doesn't need a lot, so no more than around 10%, and it definitely has helped. It's not essential, but it does make it look more realistic. So I'm going to put that up to around the 8%, and that's definitely massively helped. You could try it with the other layers. I don't think it really needs it. I think just for that brightest layer, then that's where it's most significantly needed. But if you wanted to try it with another layer, you can go to the bloom affect the whole layer and ramp it up with another colour as well. Arguably that helps. It intensifies it. I quite like it actually, so we'll leave it there. We're going to go back to our candle layer. Let's start adding a little bit of detail to that too. Go back to our colours. We'll use the colours up here again. We don't want to use those bright colours really. We use that colour. Now the light from the actual candle is going to pick it up here, so we'll just turn the size of the brush down to the lower end of 2%, have the opacity at around 30%, and because there's a bright light here, it's going to reflect on the wax, obviously the waxy surface of the candle, which is reflective. Maybe if you have any little anomalies around the edge of it too, then you would expect it to pick up on those. If we wanted to just grab a colour from here, in fact let's go back to our colours, let's use the colours we used. So let's use that colour, turn the size of the brush up to the top end of 2%, and we'll just add some sense that bits of the candle are not completely smooth. Go back to our colours, use this colour, and we could perhaps add a little bit of an area where the wax has trickled down maybe. Go back to our colours again, go to this middle colour of these three, just add a little bit of a highlight on the edge if it's needed. Like so, maybe along this edge too, and slightly downwards. Doesn't need a lot, your imagination is quite good at filling in the blanks, but we will just sharpen up a little bit that back edge. So we'll turn the opacity down a little bit to around 20% and put the brush at the lower end of 2%. We'll just go around and sharpen up that back edge of our candle a little bit. In fact, the opacity on that is too strong, so we'll turn it down to 15% and we'll also put the brush up to top end of 2%. We don't want to have it too sharp because then it's going to detract from whatever detail we put at the front. So sharpened up that back edge a little bit, create some more variation of tone in this center area. Bit more of a glow around this section too, because it is translucent, so any bit at this front is going to have the light penetrating through it. Go back to our darker colours, go to this colour, we'll turn the opacity really low, so around the 5%, and we'll just almost create like a little bit of a shadow. I know it seems strange, but almost a shadow on this section here, like that. Last couple of details, I will go for this brighter colour, turn the size of the brush really quite low to the lower end of 2%, and we'll put it up to around 15% opacity. Just exaggerate perhaps the light that's reflecting in the centre area especially. And then maybe just there's a couple of points around that are really reflecting back as well. Now, we're going to create a background effect now, like a bokeh effect. Now, as much as there is an actual brush that will do it for you, so if you go to the luminance and there is a bokeh light there, you can actually just quickly do something like that, but I actually think that looks pretty rubbish. Even if you turn the opacity down and you get more of a subtle effect, I'm not really a massive fan. If you're after speed over quality, then go for that. It will certainly do the job quickly for you. But I think there's a slightly better version of that we can go for. And I do think it's satisfying to have done things by hand yourself. Anyway, so I'm going to create another layer for this. Put it above the candle but below all the flames. We don't want it to go over the top of the light, but it can go arguably in front of the candle. And what we're going to do for this is we go to our soft, or rather our airbrushing. We'll go to the medium hard brush. We'll go to our colours, go to our blue. We'll put it at around the 50% opacity, and you can vary the size of this brush now. And all you need to do is a few taps, so you can press on hard or you can press on light, so you can try a few different ones. We'll put it a little lower down, in fact. We'll maybe just create an area around this section. So you can tap lightly, you can tap more firmly, you can change the size, so you can vary it up a little bit. If it drags a little bit and it ends up with a slightly more irregular shape, doesn't really matter too much, but you can start to build up some blue shapes more manually. Sometimes you press very lightly, sometimes you press a bit more and it appears more apparent. You can overlap them. So just like we saw on the bokeh effect that it created for us, when they overlap, because it's at 50%, when they overlap, you get more of a concentration there too. And that's a really important part of this effect. So we'll do some blue ones to begin with, and then we'll change and shift the tone. We'll go back to our colours, we'll try a different tone. We'll try this orange. We can overlap and mix them. Again, change the size. This way you can really control the size, the position, the actual colours of them. I just prefer using this kind of method. So we'll go for some of these other colours. We'll go for more of these kind of cream yellow colours. Go for a nice bright one there, a couple perhaps. Change and vary the size of the brush. You can do as much or as little as this effect as you think. Sometimes if you get too much of one type of brightness or colour, you can just backtrack it and try again. Vary the colours between probably those 3 colours or some of those as well. Maybe go for some of the cooler colours, make it really quite large for here for the foreground. Let's make it even bigger. Maybe some slightly smaller ones for the background. Whoops, smaller ones for the background. Go for the lighter colour again. So maybe that's a bit bright. Well, we'll try it. Let's have a look. Yeah, I think that's a little bit too bright, actually. So we'll go for those colours in the background. I think they're a bit better. So try and cluster them together. Get some nice overlapping formations. The next thing you can try, the next stage of this, if you go to your eraser tool and you're on the soft airbrush and you put it at around the 5% and turn the opacity up to around 30%, is you can go in the center of some of your shapes and you can start to just soften the middle of them a little bit. Now you can go a bit heavy-handed with this. It is supposed to be a subtle effect, but you want to just remove some of the intensity from the center of those. So when you get to the outer edge, it's brighter, and then in the center, it's a bit more removed. Now, like I say, you can vary the size of the brush, and you don't want to overkill it. If you do it just enough here and there, you're going to create that overall effect. It doesn't need to be on absolutely every single one. The next stage that really isn't apparent on the bokeh brush that Procreate gives you is a grain and more of an interesting texture on that bokeh. So if you go to your eraser tool, you go along to your charcoal brushes, and I'm going to use the Vine charcoal. Now change the size of your brush to suit the bokeh shapes and just test out the different strength of a razor. Now you can easily go too much on this. So if you put it up too much like that, it's just going to obliterate it. But if you put it on too low, you're not even going to notice it. So I would keep it on the larger side, in fact. So let's put it up somewhere quite high in the brush size. We're not near the top, but we are probably around the 25%. But we'll keep it quite low on the opacity. Let's try it on the 25%. And you can start to see we can add a texture to it. Perhaps a little bit too strong even then. So we'll put it lower down at around the 20%. And it's not going to be incredibly noticeable, but it's just going to soften the artificial appearance of that bokeh. It's just going to give it a bit more of a personality, a bit more of a life. You'll actually see it looks more analog and less digital. So we'll just soften it in here and there. Like I say, it can easily be too much. You could always turn it down even lower, put it around the 10%. Go over it a couple of times. In fact, that works just about right. It's a very subtle effect, but it is just giving it a slightly more natural appearance. So yeah, around the 10% is about right, I would say. Now, obviously, the amount to which you press on with it is going to be a determining factor as well. I'm pressing on quite hard, but I don't press on hard, it doesn't really do anything. Press on quite hard around the 10%, and I think that's a nice effect. So just move around the canvas to the appropriate bits, and then you can start to see that works a little bit better. So now that we've got that, we will duplicate the layer again. On this new layer, I'm just going to move it around. I think I'm going to increase the size of it, maybe just have the effect going off the edge of our canvas. So I'm just having some of it like this around the edge, maybe even have it just more in the corner like that. You can play around with it with all sorts of techniques and positions. I'll duplicate that original layer again, but I'm going to move it again to a different area, maybe flip it horizontally, increase the size. We'll try it in this bottom corner perhaps, maybe a little bit higher up this time. I think that works quite well. We'll duplicate that layer. Perhaps it just intensifies it, brings it forward a little bit. We could do the same with the layer above it, duplicate it, again, brings it forward a little bit. I think that's quite a nice effect. So you can move these around, find a position that works really well for you. There's lots of experimenting to be had with this effect. Now, if I just compare that with the actual bokeh brush, again, just so you can see the difference, I think it's a much more synthetic look than the one we've created, and controlling the colors is also quite tricky by comparison. A good thing you can also do with these layers is distort them, because sometimes the bokeh effect isn't an obvious circle shape, it might be more of an ellipse. So by changing it on the transform tool, you can just stretch it out a little bit, makes it a little bit more convincing, more believable. See what you can come up with, have a little bit of an experiment, see how you go. If there's some that you don't like higher up, You can always then, if you go back to the correct brush, obviously, you go back to an appropriate brush, maybe on airbrushing, turn the opacity up. You can soften some of the ones that you don't want to be as apparent and interfering. You can just knock them back until you find the right level. Keep experimenting and see how you go with it. And I've just deleted or removed the original layer. I actually think now that the ones that I've distorted and moved around work better on their own. So find the right balance for you, see what works best, and yeah, I hope you have success with it. If you've enjoyed watching this tutorial, make sure to press the like on the video, leave a comment, suggestions perhaps of things you'd like to see in the future. Obviously I'd like you to subscribe, press the bell notification, you will be notified about future videos if you do that, and I hope to catch you back here again. Thanks for watching, have a fantastic Christmas, see you later.